of today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf vav, Bava Basra 6, but we're going to start on the bottom of Hey Amr Beis and 5b, 2 lines from the bottom. Gemara has recorded a dispute on daf Hey between Reish Lakish and Abaye and Rava. So Reish Lakish says a person who has a debt due and the person says, I paid back the money that I owed, but I paid it back early. We don't believe him. We don't believe a person who says he paid back his debt early. And Abaye and Rava says the person is believed to say he paid it back early. He wants to get rid of his debt. So the Gemara now asks the question about that. Let's say we had the following question, 2 lines from the bottom on 5b. And of course, all of our Torah study is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael and the Seis Tzara. So the Gemara asks the question, Tavu Achar Zman. Now let's say the people made a claim. The person who says you owe me money made this claim late. He didn't make the claim on the date that it was due, but let's say he made it a week later. And the person said, no, I paid you back, but I paid you back early. So Mahu. So what will be the law there? Mi Amrina, and do we say the Malcolm Chazaka that since there's a presumption that people don't pay back early, but we still allow this person to say Amrina Mali L'Shaker, which is basically why would I lie? Meaning to say, if I was going to make a claim, I would have made a better claim, so I would have said I paid it on time. This is like the idea of migo. Now we believe a person if he says I could have made a better claim. So in this case, so do we say that we would believe this statement even though it's going against the chazaka that people don't typically pay early? Odelmar on top of 6a, but Malcolm chazaka lo amrina mal shaker. Or in a place where there's a presumption against doing something, we don't say this concept. I mean, say in a place where there's a presumption against paying back early, we don't say, we believe him if he says he paid back early in this circumstance, because if he wanted to, he could have said he paid on time. So the Gemara says, how do we deal with this question? Tashma. So the Gemara is going to try and bring 3 proofs. In the end, the Gemara is not going to be conclusive, but we're going to try and bring 3 proofs. And the first 2 are from the Mishnah that we did on Daf Hey. So first is, it says that if the 2 partners had to put up a fence, and they were both obligated, and Reuven put it up, and then he says to Shimon, give me the money, it's Bechazka Shenas, and we assume Shimon had given the money, until Reuven brings a proof that Shimon didn't give it. Now, Hechidami, what's the scenario here? If you want to say the scenario is that Reuven makes the claim from him after the time that he was supposed to pay, and Shimon says, I paid on the proper time. Pshita, it's obviously the case that Reuven will be the one who has to bring the proof. So it must be that we're talking about here that what's the Chedesh of the Mishnah? Shimon says, I paid it early, and still we believe him. Alma fil b'makom chazaka. So we see from here, even though there's a presumption that people don't pay early, Amrina Mali Shaker, we believe him if he says, since I could have claimed I paid it early, we believe him when he says, since I could have claimed I paid on time, we believe him when he says he paid it early. Mari says, no, this case is not a good proof to that. Why? Because this case is different. Shani Achad, they call Shafa Zimnehu. Every time you're building the wall and you finish a row, that's really like the equivalent of that's the time to pay. So even though he paid it early, quote unquote, he wasn't really paying it early because the debt was due because he had finished a portion of the wall. So another attempt, and this in the opposite direction. Tashma. So from 4 cubits and above, we don't obligate the person to pay. It means, say, if Reuven and Shimon building a wall, they both have to chip in for the first 4 cubits, but after that, we don't make Shimon pay more than 4 cubits. So if Reuven wants to build more than 4 cubits, Shimon doesn't have to pay. But then Shimon puts up his own wall next to the higher wall. That's an indication that Shimon likes the wall that it's higher than 4 cubits. So then we force him to pay under those circumstances. And then we assume he hadn't paid unless he had brought a proof that he actually paid. So the Gemara says, well, what's this scenario? If we're talking about here where Reuven makes the claim for the money from Shimon, but he makes it at a later time, And Shimon says, I paid on the proper time. Am I low? Why wouldn't we believe him? So it must be that we're talking about this scenario is money. Shimon says, I paid it early. So we see from here where there's a presumption that you don't pay early. We don't allow him to make the claim. Well, this Migu claim of why would I lie like that? I would have given you a better lie. So isn't this a proof that we don't say that in a case where there's a chazaka that people don't pay early? No, this case is different. That the reason why we don't believe him is because we assume he for sure wouldn't pay early in this case. Because he says, who says the rabbis are going to make me pay? This is an obscure law that I don't have to pay for the wall if it's higher than 6 feet, unless I start building my wall opposite that, above 6 feet, which thereby indicates that I could attach to it. But it's not the typical case. So he thinks they'll get away with it without having to pay. So there for sure won't pay early. So there we don't believe it. So the third attempt, Tashma, this comes from the Mishnah in Shavuos. God willing, we'll get to Masechah Shavuos soon, and we'll do Masechah Shavuos together. The Mishnah in Shavuos says, Marnoli biyadcha. Reuven makes a claim to Shimon, you owe me $100. And Shimon says, Amar lo hin. He says, you're right, I do owe you 100. Lamachar, Amar lo teneli. The next day, Reuven says to Shimon, give me my $100. And he says, Im Amar nisati v'cha. If Shimon says to him, yeah, I owed you 100 and I paid you, I gave it to you, Potter, well, then he's going to be exempt. If as long as he takes an oath, Rashi says, so be exempt then. But let's say he says, I don't have it, chayev. He has to pay the money. My love, doesn't it mean nisati v'cha? What does it mean when he says, I already gave it to you? I'm only paraticha his money. Isn't that he says, look, I paid it when it was due. I don't have it at all. What does that mean? Isn't that I paid it within the proper time? I paid it early. The Katani Chayev, and we say under that case that he has to pay the money. So we see from here under these scenarios. We see from here on these scenarios that we don't believe him if he says he paid within the proper time, if it goes against the chazaka that people don't pay within the proper time. So isn't that a proof? The Gemara says, no, that's not a proof, because it's not what the Mishnah means. What does the Mishnah mean when he says, what does that mean? It means, it says it never happened. I never admitted to owing you the money. And then there, under that case, he's going to be liable to pay. Because we have witnesses who saw you admit to having borrowed. And now that you're denying it, you're for sure saying you didn't pay it, because we have a concept. Whoever says they never borrowed, it's like he's saying he never paid. And so therefore, that's the reason why you have to pay. So, okay. So now the Gemara says, the next case was like we had been discussing, that if there's a wall that falls down, the two partners have to put up a wall that's 4 amos, i.e. 6 feet. But if one guy wants to go more than that, then if Reuven wants to go higher, Shimon doesn't have to pay for that, except if Shimon does some other action which indicates that he likes the wall there and he's intending to use it, then he would have to pay for the higher wall as well. So if he samachol koso acher, says our Mishnah, once he puts another wall corresponding to the wall of the partners, then megalgal and masakol, then he has to pay for everything. So Amar Rav Huna says samach lepalga, samach lekula. So let's say that one person built a wall that's 10 feet wide, and now Reuven built it 10 feet wide. Shimon comes along and builds this wall that's above 6 feet. He builds it 5 feet wide. Or else, let's say the wall goes up 10 feet high, and Shimon builds a wall corresponding to it that's 8 feet high. So Rav Huna says samach lepalga, samach lekula. If he builds a wall that's half the height of the extension, or half of it, then he has to pay for all of it. Rav Nachman says no. Am I the samach? So he only has to pay for the part that he put near it, just corresponding to the amount that he put near it. We don't assume he's going to go the full way up. But she didn't part, meaning say if he went up 8 feet and the Reuven went up 10 feet and then Shimon built a wall 8 feet, you only make him split the 8 feet height of the wall. But even Rav Huna says that, yeah, you have to pay for everything. He would admit bekarnavalufta. So what's a karnavalufta? So Rashi says bechibur shebekeren zavis, that the word lufta means to connect, and so it's a connected corner, meaning to say that let's say Rashi says that end of the house of Ruvain was connected to a wall between the two courtyards. So it's very clearly that under these circumstances that that's all he's going to do, meaning to say there's a connected corner, and that's all he's going to do. He's not going to build more than that. Very clearly not going to build more. So that's the circumstance we have to say that's always going to build. So therefore, Rav Huna would admit under those circumstances. Moda Rav Nachman ba'afriza ubekavata de kshurei. So what's afriza and what's kavata de kshurei? So afriza, Rashi says here, is le'inyan gova with respect to height. That where Rav Nachman says that which he didn't go up, we don't make him go up. He admits, Moda, who Rav Nachman admit that if he makes in the wall that's next to the place where you put the beams on it, basically you put the tops of the beams on it so that it's very clear that you're going to go higher. So if it's very clear from the way you're building it that you're going to go higher, that means that he clearly wants the top, the full height of the first wall that Reuven built. So therefore, if it's clear, the implication of your construction is that you're going to go higher. So Rashi says a frieza is a long piece of wood and thick that you put on the whole length of the wall in order to put on it the heads of the beams. So that's what we're talking about here. That basically you make a space and you're going to put the beams on top of it. Well, then we're going to make you pay for the full thing, even according to Rav Nachman. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, Bei kaveh lo ave chazaka. Now let's say, basically, okay, so there's a lot of different ways to explain this, but this is the way Rashi explains it. That let's say what happened was Shimon made a wall that was higher, and he made it above 6 cubits, and he made windows or spaces in the wall going out to Reuven's side, so Reuven could put beams in there. So basically it's an indication that Reuven was going to build. But that's not a presumptive status that Reuven had said, I'm going to pay for it. Why? And Reuven and Shimon can claim basically that Reuven can claim, it's obviously the case that I paid you for it. Otherwise, why would you have done that? Meaning to say, Reuven saying, I paid for it on the basis of these holes that you made in the building to allow me to, you made these holes so I could build basically my structure corresponding to your wall. No, that's not a proof because as we'll see in a moment, the afagav the avid, and even though he made there basically casings for the walls, he made moldings, or he made like thick pieces of wood, it's still not an indication that Reuven had already paid for this wall. Why? The Amarle, because Shimon could always claim, Amina, I said to myself, I know you're going to come around, you're going to want to build a structure there in your property to connect to my wall. And then I'm going to say to you, aha, pay for the wall. And then I'm going to have to destroy my building. Meaning it's always better to have the construction done at the outset because you're anticipating what's going to happen. So therefore, Reuven can't claim over the fact that you built it, that shows that I participated already. Amar Nachman, achzik lohordi lo achzik l'kshurei. So now Rashi says, what are we talking about, these presumptive statuses? So the word chazaka here is not like typically we're going to get to in Bava Basra, where we're going to learn about a chazaka of 3 years, that once you have something in your possession for 3 years, it's a proof that it's yours. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is cheskas tashmishim ba'alma, meaning to say that you're allowed to use something that you share property and your friend is letting you use it. And in one moment that you use it and he's quiet, that causes the presumptive status. Like we're going to say that immediately if somebody would do something, you would have to object. Otherwise it's an indication that he doesn't mind. And so therefore, so that's the case what we're talking about here according to Rashi, although not everybody agrees with this. So it says Rav Nachman, so if a person is allowing you to put the thin beams on his property, it's not an indication that he's going to allow you to put the thick beams on his wall. And so too, but if he allows you to put the thick beams, that's an indication that he's going to allow you to put the thin beams. Rav Yosef Amar Achsak Hordi Achsak Kshuri. Rav Yosef says no. Even if he allows you to do thin beams, he'll also allow you to put the thick beams. Ikidami Amar Rav Nachman Achsak Hordi Achsak Kshuri Kshuri Achsak Hordi. An alternative version, Rav Nachman says once you have the presumptive status to allow one on, you either one works for the other one. And now we have the same thing with respect to the drainage of the water. Amar of Nachman Achsak Natvi. Let's say your neighbor allows you the water to drip off your roof, and he doesn't make you put up a gutter. Achsak Shifli. You're allowed to put up a gutter there as well. Excuse me. Achsak Shifli. But if he's allowing you to drain the water through a gutter, then it goes to a specific place, it's not an indication. Lo Achsak Natvi. It's not an indication he's going to allow your water to drain just without a gutter into his property. Rav Yosef says, I feel Achsak Shifli. Rav Yossi says even if you're allowed to do it with a gutter, you're allowed to do it with just without a gutter. And Ikadamri, alternative version, Amar Nachman there Rav Nachman says once you have allowed to drain the water from either roof, either with a gutter or without a gutter, it's allowed. Although it's tzrifa de urbani low, but now with a tzrifa de urbani. Rashi says, what's this tzrifa de urbani? This is a roof. Basically, Gag shal tzrif shardil balaz. That basically you cover over this roof with the branches of a willow, which, as we know from Masechah Sukkah, is an urbani. And because the water is it's going to gather there a lot, and it's going to come a lot of water down in that place, the owner of the courtyard won't be allowed to use it. And so basically, it's not going to drain the water in the same manner. And so therefore, you wouldn't have a presumptive status that you could allow the water to run off through that type of roof. Rav Yosef says, I feel tree for the urban. You'll have even the presumptive status to that type of roof. And Rav Yosef Rav Yosef uvda b'tree for the urban. In fact, Rav Yosef allowed it with the tree for the urban. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Baravu Masker bayis l'chaver. So somebody rents out a property to his friend, but a bira gedola. So it's like basically an apartment building. One story or 2-story apartment building with a lot of different apartments. One guy has one room there on top of 6B. Mishtamish bezizo bekasla. Then you're allowed to use on the outside of your room the wall. They put stuff in the holes in the wall in those days, and they stored stuff, or the hooks on the outside of the wall. Adal amos. You have up until 4 cubits outside the area of your wall that you could still use it. Meaning saying you could extend 4 cubits behind your room. And let's say you're on the roof, then you can use the thickness of the wall on the top. You can put stuff on. You can put your plants on there. Who knows? But if the tarbetz apani was this beautiful garden that there was a walls in the garden, and that wasn't meant for the people who are living in the apartments to be able to use, so that you wouldn't be allowed to use. Rav Nachman Didei Amar Afil B'Tarvetz Apani. He even allowed you to use the walls of this garden. In those days, they didn't use the backyards like we use them, so the backyard that wasn't allowed. But Rava Amar Afilo even in the backyard. Amar Ravina Hai Keshura Demitalalta. So Ravina says this Keshura Demitalalta. So he says this beam that they made for shade that they would stick in the wall in order to you would make you would use it and then put something covering over it to give you shade. That you have 30 days to protest if you're the owner. You don't have to object right away. First 30 days, the guy doesn't say, "Oh, you didn't object." But if it's after 30 days and you don't object, that's considered to be a chazaka, and the person's allowed to continue using it. So the sukkah the mitzvah, but if it's a sukkah that you use for a mitzvah, then ad shivin yomim, they will have a chazaka. The first 7 days, you don't have a presumptive status because the person is going to allow you to use the sukkah. He's not going to object. But basar shivas yomin, right away after 7 days, if he doesn't object, have a chazaka. Then it's going to be a presumptive status that you're allowed to use it. And if the person who was putting the beam up connected it with like cement, then or some sort of adhesive that was strong, then it's clearly an indication that he wants to leave it there for a while. Then we'll alter having chazaka. Then right away we're going to assume that if the guy doesn't object, that's a presumptive status. So now we have the next case. So basically, Abaye says, let's say you have 2 houses. and then they're opposite sides of a public street. So basically, across the street from each other. And we want to make sure they don't look into each other's roof because there's going to be a damage, visual trespassing. So so how do they pay for the roof? Basically, because it's not a shared fence, but there's shared there's a shared visual trespass. So so basically, each one builds a wall on half of their roof, and the other one builds it on the other half, so they can't look in, and they add on a little extra to stop them from looking from the side. So the Gemara says, "My why is it only if it's from one domain to the other, from the public across from public domain? I feel if even if they're basically right next to each other in the public domain, in the private domain, they should build like that to make sure that they don't look into each other's property." So Gemara says, "No, they need to tell us about this in the public domain because you might have said, name away sof." Because you could have said everyone could claim to his friend, even if I'll build this wall, even if I'll build half my wall, it's not going to protect you because in the end, you still need to build a whole wall because you need to protect yourself from the public domain. So therefore, go build a whole wall. Don't make me build anything. Kamash one. No, we see that even though he could say this, he could say you have to make the whole wall. The Amar way, Kamash one, the Amar way, Rabim biyamama chazali, b'laylo chazali, at ben biyama ben b'laylo chazisali. The guy who's building the wall could say, I only want to build half of it because the people, they can only see me during the day. You could see me during the day and night. Or inami Rabim kikamina chazali kiyasvina or chazali. Or maybe the people, they can only, down in the public, they can only see me when I stand, but when I'm sitting, they can't see me. You see me when I'm standing or sitting, or Rabim, or alternatively, the people down below in the public, they have to really look. They have to bring out their binoculars. If they're not looking, they don't see me. And you'll always see me because you're just right across. Therefore, you have to put up half the wall. If each one makes a half a wall, and they added on a little bit. So the Gemara says, isn't this obvious? Pshita. The Gemara says, no, it's Shricha. They're talking about a case, the Kadam Chaminayo Va'avin. No, we're talking about a case where one of the people went ahead and he made half the wall in his portion first. And now he's saying, you build half the wall in your portion. We might have said, name away idach, that the person who didn't build it yet could say, Shakol Uznika, Take from me half of your expenses, and you make the whole wall. Meaning to say, you build the whole thing there on your wall. I don't want to have to build it on mine. I'll just pay half for the remaining wall. So Kamash one, no, he can't do that. The Amarway at my time that the one who built half the wall say, why didn't you go ahead and build it? You just don't want to ruin your property. You don't want to build a wall up there. You can't force me to build the whole thing. I don't want to ruin my building either. I want you to build it. I mean, so you can't force me to build the whole thing on my property. Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel. So says of Nachman name Shmuel. Gag hasamach l'chatzer chaver. So let's say you have a roof. And basically, they're different heights. So the roof of one person's property borders on the courtyard of another person's property. Also, mako gavoa arba amos. So the person who owns the roof, he has to make. So there is a roof that's overlooking a courtyard. The person who has the roof has to make a wall that's 4 cubits so that he won't commit visual trespass into the other person's property. But between the two roofs, then they don't need to make this wall because people don't typically use the roofs at all times. So we're not worried about hezek re'iyah from one roof to another roof, but we are worried from one roof looking down the courtyard. He says between the roofs, you don't have to make a wall of 4 cubits, but you have to make a wall, a partition that's 10 tefachim. 4 cubits is 6 feet. 10 tefachim is 40 inches. Approximately 40 inches. So Gemara says, what's the purpose of a wall that's 10 tefachim? If it's to stop visual trespass, Arba amos binam. We should require the 4 cubits. The iu nitbasalav kaganov. And if it's just to demonstrate what's your property, so that the person doesn't walk into it and you'll catch him like a thief. Well, then it's sufficient. Just put down pegs to show it's your property. The iligdim utulayim, and if it's to stop his animals from coming into your property, well, if that's the case, but the bas rosh sagi, it will be enough to put up like some beams or boards at a distance of 3 cubits from each other, so to stop them from passing in. So the Gemara says no. It's to show which is yours, so that the thief can't walk in, meaning say he can't come into your property. But if it was just the pegs in the ground, he can move them and he could claim, I wanted to measure the area of the roof, and so therefore I stuck my hand into your property. But basically, if it's a small board or a small peg, it can easily be moved. But if it's a mechitza of 10 tefachim, that can't easily be moved. So the Gemara asks the question: the Gemara challenges Rav Nachman, who says you have to make it of 10 tefachim high. Didn't we say in the Brisa that if his courtyard was above the roof of his friend, then the owner of the courtyard is not obligated to make a partition so he can't see the roof of his friend? Doesn't mean he doesn't have to do anything at all. The Gemara says, no, no, we're not worried about visual trespass of Hezek Riyah, but we are worried about the 10 tefachim. Next case, Idmar. So you have 2 courtyards, and they're on basically on a ascending ground. So one's above the other. So how do you pay for the wall? So basically, since we're going to have to make a wall that's 4 cubits, but we start at the bottom, and the part on the bottom until we get to the part where it becomes 4 cubits, that only the person on the bottom has to pay. And he goes up until they share the land together. The Elyon Bo Kenegdo, and then you build above, and they would have to pay together. So Rav Chisda says Elyon Messiah Milamatu Bona. Now the person who's above also has to already pay from the bottom, from the foundation. He already has to pay. And Tanya Kavasi the Rav Chisda. Indeed, we have a price like Rav Chisda. Shtei Chatzer Zul Malam Mizu. Well, Yomar, let's say you have 2 courtyards, one's above another. Well, Yomar Elyon Areni Boni Mikenegdi. He can't just claim, I'm just going to chip in for the part that's corresponding to my courtyard. No, he has to pay all the way from the bottom. But the Gemara says that's where they're just equal courtyards. But if the courtyard of one of them was higher than the other one, then he doesn't need a wall because then it's like a roof. If this courtyard was above the roof of the friend, then he doesn't need to do it because we don't care that he's looking into the roof. There's no hazakriya, as we said, into a roof. Okay, so that's all. We'll stop today's daf, and God willing, pick this up later today, of course, at 8 o'clock, and then tonight at 7:20 we'll do the daf, God willing.